But I know the truth. There's no going back. You've changed things. Forever.
Hey there, friendo. Welcome to a series where I discuss pop culture trends in my own words. In my last few videos, I've explored the concept of 90s cool. You know, that period from the mid-90s to the early 2000s where leather, sunglasses, and John Woo action dominated the cinematic idea of cool. But sadly for those of us who like fun, the techno music and sword fighting age couldn't last forever. If you look throughout history, it's pretty easy to pinpoint when a pop culture era met its end. 90s cool was clearly on the downslide when the Matrix Revolutions underperformed in 2003, and the final nail in the coffin came with the abysmal failure that was Ultraviolet in 2006. The world was ready for a new style of cool, and when you look at the landscape of the 2000s, it becomes increasingly clear what that was. When trying to understand pop culture trends, it's good to start with the overall vibe of that era. So what was life like in the 2000s? In my recollection, the 2000s were a dark and somber decade that was defined by a single day that shook the world forever. And of course, the day I'm referring to is September 11th, 2001. 9/11 engulfed the West in a kind of fear that we had never experienced before. And on top of that, we had to deal with the war on terror, the rise of mass shootings, and a major financial recession. These catastrophic events made it clear that the party of the late 90s was over. The world suddenly felt like a dark and scary place, and its problems felt very real, close, and personal. And as history has often shown, a drastic change in the public consciousness will have a major effect on pop culture. By the mid-2000s, the moviegoer was long past the cheesy 80s action hero, and we were growing tired of the heavily stylized 90s cool that felt irrelevant in the current world. The world was crying out for a grounded, realistic style that reflected the very real times that we lived in, and by the mid-2000s, we got it. In my eyes, the best words to describe the 2000s cinematic cool are gritty realism. From here on out, I'll refer to this style as Nolan Cool. Nolan Cool is named after the visionary director Christopher Nolan, who had an incredible run in the 2000s and 2010s that included films like Memento, Insomnia, The Prestige, The Dark Knight trilogy, and Inception. Nolan's brand of dark, grounded, and mind-bending cinema is perhaps the most emblematic of that era. The Nolan Cool, gritty realism style was at the peak of its powers from about 2006 to 2012. And although the world changed in 2001, the seeds of gritty realism had already been planted the year before. The influences of this style could warrant their own video, but I believe the Nolan Cool fuse was officially lit in the year 2000 with two groundbreaking films that paved the way for the next decade. Those two films were Christopher Nolan's Memento and M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable. Memento stood out from the crowd for two reasons. First, it had a gritty and realistic visual style that was beyond anything else at the time. Its raw, gritty, and realistic style set the tone for 2000s crime films and thrillers. Secondly, it introduced the world to Nolan's brand of mind-bending, unconventional storytelling, which became a go-to storytelling device in the 2000s. Which is something that M. Night Shyamalan also deserves a lot of credit for. Shyamalan's Unbreakable introduced us to a concept we would become obsessed with in the 2000s, the gritty and realistic take on a fantasy topic. Unbreakable explored its comic book subject matter with a sense of seriousness and gravitas that we had never seen before. It opened the floodgates for serious and realistic takes on traditionally lighthearted fare. And lastly, the 2000s needed its own brand of action like the 90s took from Hong Kong cinema. And that style of action would come in 2002 with the release of The Bourne Identity. The Bourne Identity represents a seismic shift in cinema where almost all action films before and after its release are different. Once the world experienced Bourne's style of on-the-ground, realistic, and shaky cam action, we never went back. Memento, Unbreakable, and Bourne-style action. These ingredients were chosen to create the perfect 2000s movie. While the general vibe of Nolan Cool is probably obvious to anyone who's watched a movie in the past 20 years, from here on I'll lay out some specific features of the style so we're on the same page. First, the movie is likely a crime drama or a thriller that has a gritty, realistic style. Second, the action scenes are clearly influenced by the Bourne series. Third, the plot is designed to be mind-bending and unconventional, with plenty of unexpected twists and turns. Fourth, if the film has fantasy elements like zombies or superheroes, it does them in a grounded, realistic take. Fifth, it has a distinct visual aesthetic that I'll call classy grit. To understand classy grit, imagine a middle-aged man in a dirty suit with a face full of cuts and bruises who's running with a gun in hand. Sixth, it has a desaturated color palette filled with grays and browns to look as realistic as possible. Seventh, the plot is a response to the fears of a post-9/11 world, dealing with things like terrorism, mass surveillance, and the distrust of institutions. Eighth, it has a tortured, brooding protagonist with a dark past. And lastly, it has a classical film score with its standout composer being Hans Zimmer. From here on out, I'll discuss what I believe are the 20 best Nolan Cool films ever made. The movies in this list don't need to have all of the previously mentioned features to be considered Nolan Cool, but the more it has, the better. This list will only feature 2 Christopher Nolan movies, otherwise his filmography would make up nearly half of it. I'm also stopping the list in 2014, and I won't be including any post-9/11 war movies as I feel like they're mostly their own thing. Now before I get into the list, here are some honorable mentions. And here we go. Number 20, Looper, 2012. Looper is the story of a man desperately trying to kill himself, or rather his future self. The first and second half of Looper feel like 2 entirely different movies. The first half is a near sci-fi classic that's like a mix of The Terminator and Akira. I love its dark and grimy vision of the future, and the idea of a fight between the present and future version of a hitman is awesome. Unfortunately, once Joe arrives on the farm, the intense cat and mouse game comes to a grinding halt, and the film loses itself. Kind of like how Joseph Gordon-Levitt's awesome Bruce Willis impression was almost lost by that horrendous makeup job. Overall, it's an extremely strong premise with great moments and a mixed execution. I enjoyed Looper, but if I'm in the mood for an early 2010s thriller with time-traveling shenanigans, I'd sooner go back to. Number 19, Source Code, 2011. Jake Gyllenhaal deserves an award for starring in the most Christopher Nolan-like movies without ever actually starring in a Christopher Nolan movie. In Source Code, Gyllenhaal plays a soldier who has to repeatedly live the last 8 minutes of another man's life to stop a terrorist attack. The whole movie feels like the War on Terror version of Groundhog Day. It's a mind-bending kind of movie that leaves you guessing from beginning to end. And to its credit, it somehow makes all of those 8-minute trips interesting. Source Code is a great choice if you want a quick and fun popcorn flick. It doesn't overstay its welcome at all. Unlike number 18, Collateral, 2004. Collateral asks the age-old question, who's more dangerous, a professional hitman or a pissed-off cab driver? Michael Mann is one of the forefathers of the gritty realism style, and Collateral is a great showcase of why. The movie is effortlessly cool with its awesome soundtrack, badass nighttime shots of LA, and heart-pounding action. Tom Cruise was born to play a villain, and his signature intensity makes for a seriously intimidating performance. Vincent is a perfect example of why we loved dark, brooding villains in the 2000s. They were just so damn cool. Cruise's chemistry with Fox is great, and their banter in the cab is definitely the best part of the movie. Unfortunately, while the first 2/3 of the movie are great, the last act becomes a paint-by-numbers bore fest. Despite that, Collateral is definitely worth watching. It's a great showcase of that 2000s grit, which bled into the 2010s with films like number 17, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, 2011. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, not James Bond and a manic emo dream girl team up to solve a deadly game of Clue. The film starts a little slow, but once all the chess pieces are set, it becomes an enthralling mystery. Its world is dark, haunting, and brutal, with certain scenes that are simply unforgettable. Rooney Mara delivers a career-making performance and has great chemistry with Craig. The film's intense atmosphere is punctuated by the distinct directing style of David Fincher and a powerful soundtrack by Trent Reznor. Casting Daniel Craig as an everyman character was a great choice because of course the audience expects him to be this badass action hero, kind of like Denzel Washington in number 16, Man on Fire, 2004. Man on Fire is the story of why it's a bad idea to piss off Denzel Washington. The first half of the movie is a bit of a slow burn that establishes an adorable wolf and cub dynamic between Denzel Washington and Dakota Fanning. It builds up their relationship so well that once she's kidnapped, you're right there cheering on Denzel as he brutally tortures and murders everyone involved. Man on Fire has that signature 2000s action movie look. Its visuals are dark and muddled, it's realistic and gritty, and it has that quick cut, shaky cam action that's as intense as it is distracting. It also set the stage for older action heroes to make a comeback. And a few years later, they were definitely back with number 15, Taken, 2008. When his daughter is kidnapped by human traffickers in Paris, ex-Special Forces agent Liam Neeson will do whatever it takes to get her back. Taken led to an angry old man action movie renaissance, and it's easy to see why. Liam Neeson had a certain wisdom and intimidating presence that made him extremely believable in the role. When he gives his iconic cell phone monologue to the kidnapper in Paris, it made it clear that angry dads are not to be messed with. Along with the inspired casting of Neeson, the movie is nearly flawless in its execution. It's a tight hour-and-a-half experience that cuts to the good stuff as quickly as possible. We want to see Liam Neeson kicking ass, and we get it. Now here's a question for all of you out there. What would scare you more? Being pursued by an angry Liam Neeson, or being chased by a horde of fast zombies in number 14, 28 Days Later, 2002? What would you do if you woke up in a hospital only to find that society had collapsed? And to add to the horror, you were butt-ass naked the entire time. 28 Days Later single-handedly reinvented the zombie movie and paved the way for the likes of The Walking Dead and The Last of Us. I mean, is there anything scarier than fast zombies? It perfectly preyed on our fears at that time, where a sudden societal collapse felt like a real possibility. Its story was chillingly believable, with an AIDS-like rage virus that spread through bodily fluids. It created so much iconic horror imagery. Cillian Murphy walking through the empty streets of London will always be burned in my mind. 28 Days Later almost felt too real, and set the stage for films like number 13, District 9, 2009. If an alien species became stranded on Earth, how do you think we would treat them? If how we treat fellow human beings is any indication, probably not very well. District 9 comes at this topic from a pretty cynical perspective, where the aliens are clear stand-ins for real-world discrimination and xenophobia. Neil Blomkamp used some inspired techniques to make the movie feel as real as possible. For instance, a lot of it is shot in that History Channel documentary style that was huge in the 2000s. They somehow made the sets look incredibly realistic on a shoestring budget. A lot of the scenes look like they were taken straight out of a war zone. On top of that, the action is great, it has some really cool alien tech, and features some delightfully gruesome body horror. District 9 effectively demonstrates how the news can control and manipulate narratives, which was also a theme in number 12, Nightcrawler, 2014. Nightcrawler is a feel-good, rags-to-riches story for psychopaths. In the film, Jake Gyllenhaal plays an odd, silver-tongued grifter who finds his purpose in the cutthroat world of guerrilla filming. The movie feels like a sick and twisted version of The Pursuit of Happiness. It shows what an intelligent, hard-working person can accomplish with morals turned completely off. Gyllenhaal's performance is seriously mesmerizing. He has that charismatic and creepy youth pastor energy that we've all encountered at some point. The most fascinating part of the movie is how it slowly peels back the curtain to show what a monster Lou truly is. It's a great commentary on the ethics of media and the kind of behavior that's rewarded in a capitalistic society. It also has some great shots of the dirty nighttime streets of Los Angeles, which is something that it shares with number 11, Drive, 2011. The main thing I learned from watching Drive is, if you want to hook up with a hot mom, all you have to do is stand there and say nothing, while also being ridiculously good looking. If I had to rank these movies on cool factor alone, Drive would probably be number 1. Ryan Gosling really channels his inner Steve McQueen and delivers one of the coolest performances in modern cinema. In the early 2010s, everyone knew a guy who bought a jacket like that after watching Drive. Much like its quiet protagonist, Drive isn't afraid to let a moment linger and to bask in its gorgeous cinematography. A good portion of the film has a chill, rainy night drive sort of vibe that's accentuated by its awesome synth soundtrack. But when things get heated, it gets violent and intense. An intensity it shares with number 10, Shudder Island, 2010. Shudder Island feels like a movie that M. Night Shyamalan would have made if his talent wasn't stolen by the Monstars. The film follows a US Marshal and his partner who are sent to an isolated mental institution to investigate a murder. But clearly, something is amiss. The movie is a great, mind-bending thriller that holds its own against the classics. I love the 1950s setting that has that masterful Scorsese level of detail. We also get an insane Leonardo DiCaprio performance that was right in the middle of his "give me my goddamn Oscar" run. It's the type of movie that needs multiple viewings to appreciate. Scorsese did a great job showing the young guns how it's done, but young Hollywood would clap back with classic thrillers of their own like Number 9, Prisoners, 2013. Prisoners put being yelled at by Hugh Jackman near the top of my worst fears list. In all seriousness, it's a really hard movie to go back to because it's so emotionally devastating. It absolutely nails one of the biggest primal fears in any person, someone you love being kidnapped. Hugh Jackman really sells this by playing a tough father who's left completely helpless and afraid. Jake Gyllenhaal also deserves a ton of credit for making what could have been a generic cop character extremely memorable. It's a film that really makes you question what you would do in that situation and what lines you would be willing to cross. Prisoners was a great showcase of the talents of Denis Villeneuve, who may become the definitive director of the 2020s. But getting back to films that define the 2000s, we also have Number 8, The Bourne Identity, 2002. In The Bourne Identity, Matt Damon wakes up on a fishing boat with the memory of a fish. The Bourne franchise is a perfect example of right place, right time. In 2002, the world was desperate for something new, and Bourne delivered. This cultural shift is evident when you compare the reception of Bourne to Die Another Day. As soon as the world saw Bourne's brand of shaky cam parkour action, we never went back. Matt Damon also brought this unassuming, everyman quality to the role, which led to more relatable action heroes. Even though the Bourne series redefined the action genre, nobody did it better than Bond in Number 7, Casino Royale, 2006. In Casino Royale, we meet a young, rookie James Bond, who would somehow become a grizzled, old James Bond only 2 films later. With its spectacular opening parkour chase, the film made an instant statement. 007 has entered the new age. The Bond series is often a great reflection of the times, and this one was no different with the new James Bond dealing in counter-terrorism. Its key to success was stripping away all the camp and bringing Bond back to basics. Martin Campbell did a fantastic job making the classic Bond iconography feel fresh again. I love the exotic locations and the casino sets that evoke so much of that Connery feel. Daniel Craig was great as a brooding, emotionally vulnerable Bond, and Eva Green was at that Helen of Troy level of elegance and beauty. 2006 was an awesome year for the gritty action movie, as it also gave us Number 6, Children of Men, 2006. Baby Diego, come on, the guy was a wanker. Children of Men has one of the most realistic post-apocalyptic worlds I've ever seen. What Alfonso Cuarón accomplished with the cinematography is simply breathtaking, with long-cut, single-shot footage that feels like it's straight out of a war documentary. There's a particular single-shot scene that I think is one of the most powerful ever made. Clive Owen, who was typecast as an action hero, was great as an everyman just trying to do the right thing. It's insane how the film's action is so compelling even though Owen never uses a gun. Children of Men had a message that we really needed at that time. Even in the darkest hour, there's always hope. And 2006 wasn't done delivering the gritty classics just yet, as it also gave us Number 5, The Departed, 2006. The Departed is a brilliant modern-day gangster film that represents the transition from the old world to the new. You have old-school wise guys dealing in arms tech with foreign gangs. You have the police right in the midst of the Patriot Act using technology that they hardly understand. And even in the meta sense, you have past versus present Hollywood superstars. It truly has one of the best casts of all time, with even Marky Mark delivering a great performance. Its story of loyalty, trust, and betrayal is gripping and unpredictable. It shows how appearances can be deceiving, and the line between good and evil can be easily misinterpreted. With The Departed, Scorsese showed that he wasn't ready to give up the crown just yet, but the modern crop of directors would respond with statement films of their own like. Number 4, Inception, 2010. Inception is pure cinematic magic. In many ways, I view it as Christopher Nolan's response to The Matrix. You have the mind-bending plot, the philosophy, the groundbreaking action, the iconic visuals, and the heavy Inspiration from anime. Nolan combined many of his inspirations, like the heists in Heat, James Bond globetrotting, and the visuals from Paprika to make something truly special. The concept of a dream-based heist film was so compelling that even the long setup never gets boring. And once the plot finally takes off, it becomes an edge-of-your-seat thrill ride. Since most of the film takes place in dreams, Nolan could basically do whatever he wanted, which led to some of the most incredible action in modern cinema. Inception is also the film that made Leonardo DiCaprio the king of Nolan Cool among actors. The gritty realism era truly produced some classics, which also included number 3, No Country for Old Men, 2007. No Country for Old Men is further proof that you should never trust a man with a weird haircut. It's a deep and complex film that took me a long time to know how I felt about it. My read on it now is that it's about the death of idealism as we age. And in a meta sense, I think the film really resonated with the shattering disillusionment that America was experiencing at that time. Besides its complex themes, my favorite part of the movie is its incredible escalation of tension, which is primarily carried by Javier Bardem's incredible performance. From the point we see Sugar sadistically murder a police officer, there's this underlying feeling of uneasiness throughout the entire film. In the last act of the film, there's this certain light switch moment that's really jarring. I was pretty stunned and disappointed the first time I saw it, but over time I've come to accept it as the masterpiece that it is. And speaking of another movie with a controversial ending, number 2
is M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong's Unbreakable. To me, the film was very obscure when it came out as far as what it was about, because you can actually break down what the film was about by basically one sentence that I think would have proved far more intriguing than their ad campaign, which is basically, what if Superman was here on Earth and didn't know he was Superman? Anyway, Unbreakable is, I actually think, one of the masterpieces of our time.
Like Tarantino, I feel that Unbreakable is an underappreciated, modern-day masterpiece. Calling it ahead of its time is a gross understatement, as it was downright prophetic of where the cinematic landscape was headed. From the opening crawl, the film tackles the subject of comic books in a grounded and serious way that we had never seen before. At its core, Unbreakable is a poignant character study about fatherhood, responsibility, and our struggle to find meaning in life. It's unfortunate that its impactful and ambiguous ending was clearly dumbed down because of studio interference. In an odd way, I think the misplaced text during the ending was somewhat of a time capsule. Mass audiences just weren't ready for a grounded, thoughtful, and serious comic book movie in the year 2000. But 8 years later, the world was definitely ready for number 1, The Dark Knight, 2008. Where do I begin? With every year that passes, I'm always astonished by how old The Dark Knight is. The way it completely dominated pop culture in 2008 was truly special. It was a cultural moment that went way beyond box office numbers. I'll never forget its incredible viral marketing campaign or my excitement leading up to it. The film had massive hype and a certain mystique to it that was undoubtedly heightened by the tragic loss of Heath Ledger. And when it finally came out, it went above and beyond the hype. Ledger's portrayal of the Joker was genuinely scary, as he represented a kind of enemy that the world was totally unprepared for. An enemy that pushed Batman to his mental, physical, and ethical limits. This Batman and Joker completely captured the zeitgeist of that time. The Joker became an instant cultural icon with so many quotes that were inescapable. The Dark Knight is one of those lightning in a bottle situations where everyone involved went all in to produce something legendary. In my eyes, The Dark Knight is the film that made Christopher Nolan the definitive director of that era. So there you have it, folks, the very best of Nolan Cool. If there's any other movies that you think belong in the pantheon of Nolan Cool, let me know. Above all else, I hope this video demonstrated how important the gritty realism era truly was. And I mean, hell, we haven't even talked about the TV shows or the games yet. Till then, stay frosty.